What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected legends walks onto a talk show stage and finds himself caught in a verbal ambush that spirals completely out of control? It only took 40 seconds of Whoopi Goldberg's opening question for the entire set to erupt into chaos, leading to one of the most shocking walkouts in daytime television history. Harrison Ford sat down on The View, expecting a standard promotional interview. The legendary actor, known for his roles as Han Solo and Indiana Jones, had been on countless talk shows over his decades-long career. He knew the routine: smile, answer questions about his latest project, share a funny anecdote or two, and move on. But this morning was about to become something entirely different. The studio audience applauded as Harrison settled into his seat on the panel. The bright lights beamed down, cameras positioned at multiple angles to capture every moment. Joy Behar sat to his left, Sarah Haynes and Sunny Hostin occupied the middle seats, and Whoopi Goldberg commanded her position at the head of the table. The energy felt normal at first, welcoming even. Whoopi started with what seemed like a simple question. So Harrison, you've been in this industry for a very long time. You've seen a lot of changes. What do you think about actors today compared to your generation? Harrison smiled, leaning back slightly. Well, I think there's tremendous talent out there. The industry has evolved, and actors today have different tools and different challenges than we did. But the craft itself, the dedication required, that hasn't changed. Whoopi nodded, but there was something in her expression, a slight tightness around her eyes. Right, but don't you think that maybe, just maybe, your generation had it easier? I mean, you guys didn't have to deal with social media, cancel culture, all the scrutiny that comes with every single word you say. The question landed awkwardly. Harrison's smile faltered just a bit. I wouldn't say we had it easier. We had different pressures. We had to prove ourselves in different ways. Every generation faces its own obstacles. But you got chance after chance, Whoopi continued, her voice taking on an edge. You could make mistakes and come back. Today's actors, especially young actors, they get one strike and they're out. Don't you think that's because your generation set up a system that protects people like you? Joy Behar shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Sarah Haynes glanced between Whoopi and Harrison, sensing the tension building. Harrison's jaw tightened. I'm not sure I understand what you're suggesting. I worked extremely hard for everything I achieved. I was a carpenter before I became an actor. I struggled for years. Oh, we know the carpenter story, Whoopi said, waving her hand dismissively. Everyone knows that story. But let's be real here. You're a white man in Hollywood. That came with certain privileges, didn't it? The audience went quiet. You could feel the shift in the room, the sudden uncomfortable energy that spread like wildfire. Harrison sat up straighter. I'm not going to apologize for working hard and being dedicated to my craft. I've never asked for special treatment, and I've never expected it. Sunny Hostin jumped in, trying to smooth things over. I think what Whoopi might be asking is whether you recognize that the industry has historically favored certain demographics over others. Not that you didn't work hard, but that others might have worked just as hard and not gotten the same opportunities. Of course I recognize that, Harrison said, his voice firm but controlled. I've said many times that the industry needs to be more inclusive. I support that completely. But that doesn't mean I should feel guilty for the career I've built. Whoopi leaned forward, her elbows on the table. Nobody's asking you to feel guilty, Harrison, but maybe a little accountability would be nice. Maybe acknowledging that you benefited from a system that kept others out. I just did acknowledge that, Harrison said, frustration creeping into his tone. What more do you want me to say? I want you to be honest, Whoopi shot back. I want you to admit that without those advantages, you might not be sitting here today. Joy Behar tried to intervene. Okay, let's maybe move on to talking about Harrison's new project. I'm sure everyone wants to hear about that. But Whoopi wasn't done. No, Joy. I think this is important. We have one of the biggest stars in Hollywood sitting right here. This is exactly the kind of conversation we should be having. Harrison looked directly at Whoopi. You invited me here. I came in good faith to talk about my work, to have a conversation. But it seems like you brought me here to make some kind of point, to put me on trial for things I have no control over. See, that's the problem right there, Whoopi said, her voice rising. You think you have no control. You have all the control. You have the power, the platform, the influence. And when someone asks you to think critically about it, you act like you're being attacked. Sarah Haynes spoke up, her voice gentle. I don't think Harrison is saying that. I think we're maybe talking past each other here. No, Sarah, I know exactly what I'm saying, Whoopi insisted. And I think Harrison knows exactly what he's doing, playing the victim when someone challenges him. Harrison's face flushed. I'm not playing the victim. I'm sitting here being accused of things, being told that my career, my life's work, is somehow illegitimate because of circumstances beyond my control. That's not a conversation. That's an attack. An attack? Whoopi laughed, but it was cold. You want to talk about attacks? Try being a black woman in this industry. Try facing real discrimination, real barriers. Then come talk to me about feeling attacked. I never said. I face the same challenges you do, Harrison said, his voice tight. I've never claimed that. But that doesn't mean you get to diminish what I've accomplished or question my integrity. Sonny tried again. I think we all respect what you've accomplished, Harrison. I think the question is more about using that platform to help others. And I do that, Harrison said, turning to Sonny. I've supported countless charities, mentored young actors, spoken out on issues I care about. But apparently, that's not enough. Apparently, I'm supposed to apologize for existing. Whoopi slammed her hand on the table. Nobody asked you to apologize for existing. Stop twisting my words. Then what are you asking? Harrison demanded. What do you want from me? You want me to say I didn't deserve my career? You want me to say I'm a fraud? What exactly will satisfy you? I want you to take responsibility, Whoopi yelled. I want you to acknowledge your privilege without getting defensive. I did acknowledge it, Harrison yelled back, his composure finally breaking. Multiple times, but you're not listening. You made up your mind about me before I even walked in here. Joy Behar put her hand on Harrison's arm. Harrison, maybe we should take a breath here. He pulled his arm away, not aggressively, but firmly. No, Joy. I've been taking breaths. I've been patient. I've been trying to have a respectful conversation. But this isn't a conversation. This is a setup. Whoopi pointed at him. See? There it is. The minute things get uncomfortable, the minute you're challenged, you cry setup. You can't handle it. I can handle a challenge, Harrison said, standing up now. What I can't handle is disrespect. What I can't handle is being brought here under false pretenses to be ambushed. The audience gasped. Sarah Haynes looked shocked. Sonny Hostin's mouth hung open. Ambushed? Whoopi stood up too. You're on a talk show. We ask questions. That's what we do. You don't ask questions, Harrison said, his voice shaking with anger. You make accusations. You lecture. You talk down to people. And when they don't grovel at your feet, you attack them. How dare you, Whoopi said, her voice dangerously quiet. How dare you come on my show and speak to me like that? Your show, Harrison said. Last time I checked, this was The View, not The Whoopi Show. There are other people at this table. But you treat it like your personal platform to berate anyone who doesn't agree with you. Joy stood up. Okay, Harrison, maybe we should go to commercial. No, Harrison said. I'm done. I'm not staying here to be insulted. He reached for the microphone clipped to his collar and started removing it. Whoopi's eyes widened. You're leaving? You're actually leaving? Yes, I'm leaving, Harrison said, pulling the microphone pack from his belt. I came here with respect. I answered your questions honestly. But I'm not going to sit here and be your punching bag because you've decided I represent everything wrong with Hollywood. This is unbelievable, Whoopi said, shaking her head. You're proving my point right now. You can't handle being challenged. Harrison placed the microphone on his chair and looked at her. No, Whoopi, I'm proving that I have self-respect, something you clearly don't think I deserve. Sonny stood up. Harrison, please, let's just talk about this. There's nothing to talk about, Harrison said. I tried. I really tried. But this isn't about dialogue. This is about humiliation. He turned to the audience. I apologize that you came here expecting a normal interview. You deserved better than this. Then he turned back to Whoopi. And you should be ashamed of yourself. You have a platform that millions of people watch. You could use it to bring people together, to have real conversations. Instead, you use it to divide, to attack, to make yourself feel superior. Get out, Whoopi said, her voice shaking. Get off my stage. Gladly, Harrison said. He walked past the panel, past the cameras, toward the exit. The audience sat in stunned silence. You could hear his footsteps echoing in the quiet studio. Joy called after him. Harrison, wait. But he didn't wait. He didn't look back. Sarah Haynes covered her face with her hands. Sonny stared at the empty chair where Harrison had been sitting. Whoopi stood at the head of the table, her chest heaving, her face a mask of fury and something else. Maybe shock. Maybe the realization that things had gone too far. Joy turned to the camera. We're going to take a break. But before they could cut away, Whoopi spoke again. Good. Let him go. We don't need people like that here anyway. The audience erupted in mixed reactions. Some people gasped. Others started talking loudly. A few people stood up. People like that, Joy said, turning to Whoopi. What does that mean? You know what it means, Whoopi said. People who can't handle criticism. People who think they're above it all. He didn't think he was above anything, Sarah said, finding her voice. You attacked him from the very first question. That wasn't criticism. That was hostility. I asked him valid questions, Whoopi insisted. You accused him, Sonny said quietly. There's a difference. Whoopi looked around the table at her co-hosts. So now you're all on his side? There are no sides, Joy said. But Whoopi, that was rough, even for you. For me, Whoopi said. What's that supposed to mean? It means you can be intense, Joy said carefully. And sometimes that intensity crosses a line. I don't cross lines, Whoopi said. I speak truth. If people can't handle it, that's their problem. But maybe how we speak truth matters, Sarah said. Maybe we can make our points without making our guests feel attacked. He's a big boy, Whoopi said. He can handle it, or apparently he can't. The stage manager waved frantically, signaling they needed to go to commercial. Joy looked at the camera. We'll be right back. The red light went off. The camera operators stepped back, but the tension remained. Whoopi sat down heavily in her chair. I can't believe he just walked off. What did you expect? Sonny said. You backed him into a corner. I asked him questions, Whoopi said, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. You interrogated him, Sarah corrected. From the moment he sat down, you were looking for a fight. That's not true, Whoopi said. It is true, Joy said. I was sitting right here. I watched it happen. You decided before he even answered the first question that you were going to take him down. I wasn't taking him down, Whoopi said. I was holding him accountable. For what? Sonny asked. For being successful? For being white? For existing in the industry before things changed? For not acknowledging his privilege, Whoopi said. But he did acknowledge it, Sarah said. Multiple times. You just didn't accept his answer because it wasn't the grovel you wanted. Whoopi looked at each of them. You're all turning on me. Nobody's turning on you. Joy said with a sigh. "But we're telling you the truth." "That was bad, Whoopi. That was really bad." The stage manager called out. 30 seconds. They all took their positions. The makeup artist rushed in to touch up their faces. Nobody spoke. When the cameras came back on, Joy addressed the audience with a strained smile. "Well, that was certainly unexpected. We're going to take some more questions from the audience after this break." But everyone in that studio knew what they had just witnessed. They had seen a respected actor, a man who had given decades to his craft, walked into what should have been a friendly interview, and instead found himself under attack. They had seen him try to be patient, try to be respectful, try to have a dialogue, and they had seen him finally reach his limit and choose dignity over tolerance. They had also seen a host so convinced of her own righteousness that she couldn't recognize when she had crossed the line from challenging questions into personal attacks. They had seen someone use their power not to enlighten, but to berate, not to educate, but to humiliate. As the show continued, trying awkwardly to move on to other topics, the empty chair where Harrison Ford had sat remained visible in every shot. A reminder of what happens when confrontation is mistaken for conversation, when point scoring is prioritized over understanding, when a host forgets that their guests are human beings deserving of basic respect. The audience members would leave that studio talking about what they witnessed. They would tell their friends and family. They would post about it online, and they would remember the moment when one of Hollywood's biggest stars decided that enough was enough. Because sometimes walking away isn't about running from conflict. Sometimes it's about refusing to participate in your own degradation. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stand up, remove your microphone, and choose yourself over the spectacle. Harrison Ford had done countless interviews over his long career. He had answered tough questions. He had been challenged by journalists, critics, and fellow actors. But he had always been treated with a baseline level of professional respect. Not because he demanded it, but because it's what any guest deserves. What happened on The View that morning was something different. It was an attempt to make him a symbol, a representative of everything someone thought was wrong with an entire generation and an entire industry. It was an attempt to extract a confession, to get him to denounce himself and his accomplishments in service of someone else's narrative. And when he refused to do that, when he maintained his dignity and his self-respect, he was accused of being defensive, of playing the victim, of not being able to handle criticism. But the people watching knew better. They could see the difference between a thoughtful challenge and a hostile interrogation. They could see who came to the conversation with good faith and who came looking for blood. Back at the table, Whoopi continued hosting, but something had changed. Her co-hosts were quieter, more reserved. The energy had shifted. Even Whoopi herself seemed less certain, less commanding. During the next commercial break, a producer came onto the stage. He spoke quietly to Whoopi, gesturing occasionally. Her face hardened. When the show returned from commercial, Whoopi addressed the camera directly. "Some of you might be wondering about what happened earlier. All I can say is that we ask tough questions here. We have real conversations. And sometimes our guests don't like that. But we're not going to apologize for doing our jobs." Sarah shifted in her seat. Sunny looked down at her notes. Joy's expression was unreadable. The show continued, but everyone knew it was just going through the motions now. The moment that would be remembered, the moment that would define this episode, had already happened. Harrison Ford had walked off The View. Not because he couldn't handle tough questions. Not because he was fragile or entitled, but because he recognized that there's a difference between a challenging interview and a character assassination. There's a difference between accountability and humiliation. There's a difference between a conversation and a confrontation. And he chose not to participate in the latter. As the show wrapped up and the credits rolled, the co-hosts gathered their things in silence. The audience filed out, buzzing with conversation. The crew began breaking down the set. Whoopi sat in her chair for a long moment, staring at the spot where Harrison had been. Her co-hosts had already left. The studio was nearly empty. A production assistant approached carefully. "Ms. Goldberg, they need you for a meeting." Whoopi nodded, but didn't move right away. She was thinking about Harrison's last words to her. "You should be ashamed of yourself." She wasn't used to being talked to like that. She wasn't used to guests walking off. She wasn't used to feeling like maybe, just maybe, she had gone too far. But she pushed those thoughts away. She stood up, straightened her clothes, and walked off the stage with her head held high. Because admitting you were wrong, acknowledging you had crossed a line, recognizing that you had misused your power and your platform, that would require a level of self-reflection and humility that felt impossible in that moment. It's easier to double down. It's easier to blame the guest. It's easier to say they couldn't handle it. They were too sensitive. They proved your point by leaving. It's easier than looking in the mirror and asking yourself the hard questions. Questions like, did I come into this interview with an agenda? Did I treat my guest fairly? Did I use my platform responsibly? Did I prioritize being right over being decent? Those questions would come later, perhaps. Or perhaps not. Perhaps the moment would pass, and everyone would move on, and the show would continue as it always had. But for Harrison Ford, walking through the backstage corridors of that studio, heading toward his car, toward freedom from that hostile environment, there was clarity. He had done the right thing. He had stood up for himself. He had refused to be diminished. And that, ultimately, was what mattered most. The interview that was supposed to promote his latest project had turned into something entirely different. It had become a moment of principle, a line drawn in the sand, a statement that success and fame don't require you to accept disrespect. Hollywood would talk about this for days, weeks even. People would take sides. Some would say Harrison was too sensitive. Others would say Whoopi was out of line. The discourse would rage on social media and entertainment news shows, but Harrison wouldn't participate in that either. He would issue a simple statement through his publicist, something brief and dignified, and then he would move on. Because that's what you do when you know your worth. You don't need to justify yourself to people who have already made up their minds. You don't need to engage with hostility disguised as dialogue. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. You simply stand up, remove your microphone, and walk away. And in doing so, you show more strength and character than 1,000 heated arguments ever could. The View would continue. New guests would come. New controversies would emerge. The show would go on. But for everyone who witnessed what happened that morning, for everyone who saw a good man pushed too far, for everyone who recognized the difference between accountability and attack, the memory would linger. They would remember the moment when Harrison Ford said enough. They would remember the moment when dignity won over spectacle. They would remember the moment when walking away was the strongest move of all. And they would remember that sometimes the person who refuses to fight isn't the weak one. Sometimes they're the one who knows their worth. Sometimes they're the one with nothing to prove. Sometimes they're the one who understands that not every battle is worth fighting, especially when the fight itself is designed to tear you down rather than lift the conversation up. Harrison Ford had spent decades entertaining millions of people. He had created characters that became cultural icons. He had worked with the best directors, actors, and crews in the business. He had earned his place in cinema history. And on this morning, on this show, when faced with someone determined to make him small, he chose to remain big. Not by fighting back with the same hostility he was receiving, not by matching anger with anger, but by simply refusing to participate, by standing up, by walking away, by showing that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all, and the most powerful thing you can do is leave.